Istanbul, June 2021. The call to prayer drifted through the late afternoon haze, carried on the warm breath of the Bosphorus. The city pulsed in gold and dust, ferry horns, distant chatter, the low hum of taxis idling near Galata Bridge. Along the waterfront, a small crowd gathered as police tape fluttered in the dry wind. Two officers stood over a discarded travel bag. Inside was a single passport, a blue American, creased at the edges, the photo of a young woman smiling back in better light. Her name was Rachel Monroe, 28 years old, missing for 8 days. Her phone was dead, her flight never boarded, and her hotel room had been cleared as if she had never stayed there at all. In the weeks before, Rachel had been seen often along the narrow lanes of Beyoğlu, filming street cats and the swirl of pigeons over Taksim Square. She had come to Turkey, she told her friends, for love, to finally meet the man who for the last 6 months had promised her a life unlike anything she had ever known. They had met online, an unexpected connection that began as curiosity and bloomed into what she described as destiny. His name, she said, was Emir. She called him her Turkish prince. Rachel grew up far from the noise and color of Istanbul. She was from Tucson, Arizona, a land of dry wind and long sun-baked silence. Her life there was modest. Part-time photographer, freelance designer, the kind of person who collected postcards and believed in coincidences. Friends said she was careful but trusting, especially with people who seemed cultured or kind. After her breakup the previous year, a quiet mutual ending with her college boyfriend, she had started spending long nights online, exploring travel forums and photography groups. That's where Emir first appeared. His profile was understated. A few landscape photos, a portrait of him in a linen shirt beside the Aegean. He spoke softly, wrote perfectly, and seemed to know how to make ordinary things sound rare. In early messages, he told her he worked in heritage preservation, something to do with his family's old estate near Bursa. He talked about restoring Ottoman fountains, funding orphanages, and bringing art students to Turkey for summer programs. When she mentioned her dream of photographing historical architecture, he offered to show her hidden places tourists never saw. It was the kind of invitation she had always imagined but never believed would happen. By spring, their conversations had become a rhythm, morning greetings, late-night calls, the feeling of belonging to someone far away. Emir's words had a way of folding intimacy into mystery. He sent her photos of old manuscripts, private courtyards, dinner tables set under fig trees. He said he could help her get a cultural exchange visa, that he knew someone at the consulate. He spoke of introductions, galleries, an exhibition in her name. Slowly, the digital distance between them began to feel smaller than the space between her and the rest of her world. Friends noticed the change. Rachel talked less about her freelance projects and more about the life ahead. Her mother, Karen, described her as quietly radiant, as if she'd already stepped into a dream. She began learning Turkish phrases, sold her car, and booked a one-way ticket to Istanbul. The night before she left, she told a friend over coffee, "This feels like the kind of story people never get to live." Her friend smiled, said to be careful. Rachel promised she would. When she landed on June 3rd, her messages came frequently, photos from her taxi, the view from her rented flat, a plate of olives and bread sent with the caption, "Breakfast with a view." Then on June 5th, the tone shifted. "He's even more handsome in person," she wrote. "But he's different, I think. Maybe just tired." That was her last message that sounded casual. After that, her replies grew shorter, timed oddly, missing her usual punctuation. The last text came on June 10th at 1:13 a.m. "Going to his family's place tomorrow. No service there, but it's beautiful." When the search began, police found her hotel room immaculate, the bed made, toiletries packed, the camera case open but empty. Her American phone was never recovered, only the local SIM card she'd bought 2 days earlier. The passport, bent damp with sand along its spine, surfaced near the ferry docks a week later. Authorities couldn't determine how it got there. The air that night in Istanbul was heavy with salt and uncertainty. In a city where millions passed unnoticed, one foreign woman had vanished quietly, leaving only a name in a file and a face on a photograph that now looked both familiar and unreachable. Rachel Monroe was born in 1993, in a small stucco house on the edge of Tucson's city limits, where the desert met the highway and the light seemed to bleach everything into a single tone of beige. Her father worked as an auto mechanic, her mother a librarian. She was an only child, soft-spoken and observant, the kind of girl who collected moments instead of friends. Her earliest fascination was with cameras, an old Nikon her father had rescued from a pawn shop. She took pictures of clouds, rusted mailboxes, the way light fractured through window blinds. She saw beauty in things most people ignored, her mother once said. After high school, Rachel studied visual arts at a community college, working evenings at a coffee shop near campus. She didn't care much for the academic side of photography, composition charts, critique sessions, but she loved the silence of the darkroom, the slow revelation of images appearing under the red glow. That patience shaped her life. She wasn't impulsive. She waited, observed, let things unfold. Her friends joked that she was born out of time, that she should have lived in the 70s, when things moved slower. Her first serious relationship began in her early 20s. Daniel, an engineering student she met during an art festival downtown. He was quiet like her, practical, sometimes painfully so. They built a life of routines, cooking simple dinners, late-night drives into the desert to watch storms. But when Daniel graduated and got a job offer in Seattle, Rachel stayed. She said she wasn't ready to leave Arizona, not yet. The breakup was gentle, though it left her hollow. Her parents noticed she stopped taking photos for months. By 2020, Rachel was freelancing from her apartment, doing design work for local cafes and travel blogs. The pandemic had stripped her of structure. No exhibitions, no clients, just long days of muted colors and digital noise. That's when she began joining online forums for photographers, searching for inspiration. The isolation had made her vulnerable to kindness, to attention that felt intentional. It was in one of those forums that she first noticed Amir. He had commented beneath her photo of an abandoned gas station. "This place looks like memory itself," she replied, amused by the phrasing. And that short exchange began a thread that would last 6 months. His profile seemed real, a Turkish flag emoji, tasteful posts about architecture and history, small glimpses of his life. He said he was 34, educated in London, working in cultural preservation. The way he wrote, formal yet intimate, made him stand out from the endless stream of casual messages she usually ignored. Their early conversations revolved around photography, travel, and the idea of beauty. Emir spoke about Istanbul with a romantic precision, describing the marble courtyards of mosques at dawn, fishermen lined along the bridge, the sound of the call to prayer over the sea. He told her that love, like architecture, needed foundation and patience. "You build it brick by brick," he said once during a late-night call, "until it feels ancient." She found that phrase hauntingly beautiful. When travel restrictions lifted, Rachel began to dream again about movement, color, and belonging somewhere else. Emir encouraged it, often sending her travel guides, Turkish music, and photos of art exhibitions he claimed to sponsor. He made it seem like an exchange of worlds, her American eye for his Ottoman heritage. "You'd love it here," he would write. "You'd see stories everywhere." In March 2021, he began to speak more personally. He told her he admired her simplicity, that she reminded him of how people used to be. Sincere. He said he had no family left, except for a few distant relatives who still carried the old title of Bey, a remnant of Ottoman aristocracy. It sounded extravagant, but he presented it with restraint, never bragging, as if embarrassed by privilege. To Rachel, who had spent her life in modest circles, his world felt impossibly elegant. Her friends noticed subtle shifts. She started dressing differently, wearing scarves he'd sent her, learning Turkish words he'd taught her over video calls. She began mentioning a possible photography project in Turkey, something about documenting restoration. When her best friend, Clara, teased her about the sudden obsession, Rachel just smiled. "He believes in me," she said. "He sees something real," her mother worried quietly. By April, Rachel was already planning her trip. She told herself it was for work, that she'd build her portfolio abroad. But somewhere inside, she knew it was for him. She wanted the story, the adventure, the romance, the validation that her quiet life had been leading somewhere. She didn't know it then, but the decision to follow that feeling would erase nearly every trace she'd ever left behind. It was a Sunday evening when the first message that changed everything arrived. The light from Rachel's laptop reflected in her glasses as she scrolled through the photography forum, half distracted, looking for something new to capture her mind. Emir had commented again, this time under a black and white photo she'd posted of an abandoned motel sign. "There's poetry in places that no longer expect to be seen," he wrote. She replied out of courtesy, but his next message appeared seconds later, not a comment, but a private note. "You have an eye for loneliness," it said. That's rare. What began as art talk stretched into a 2-hour exchange about light, ruin, and memory. He sent her links to his supposed restoration work, an Ottoman bathhouse turned museum, a university exhibition. His tone wasn't flirtatious, not yet. It was the tone of someone intelligent, slightly world-weary, generous with his attention. He wrote like a man used to being listened to. Over the next few weeks, the messages came daily. Sometimes long, meandering letters about his family's estate outside Bursa. Sometimes voice notes describing how the call to prayer echoed against the old marble dome. The sound fascinated Rachel. Foreign, rhythmic, somehow peaceful. Emir spoke about history as if he'd lived it. He told her he came from a line of scholars and diplomats. Princes of the past, perhaps, but only in name now. He called himself a caretaker of legacy, not its owner. That modesty made him feel safe. When he first called her beautiful, it wasn't about her looks. He said it after she described photographing the reflection of a dead cactus in her window pane. "You notice things that others miss," he said softly. "That's beauty, not what's in the frame, but who's holding the camera." It disarmed her. Compliments from men had always made Rachel uncomfortable, but this one felt different, almost reverent. She didn't know that this kind of admiration, the intellectual kind, was its own kind of seduction. By February they were messaging late into the night. Emir spoke of bringing her to Istanbul to photograph the hidden veins of the old empire. He described stone courtyards, half-collapsed minarets, places untouched by tourism. "You could show my world the way it really is," he said. He promised introductions to curators, grant writers, and journalists. Every detail sounded plausible, even exciting. He sent photos, perfectly composed, as if taken from a magazine, and said they were from his recent projects. One afternoon, he told her about a planned exhibition for foreign artists that summer. He could secure her a guest slot under his foundation's sponsorship. The offer felt like opportunity wrapped in romance. He framed it as professional, a chance to bridge cultures through art. When she hesitated, worrying about costs, he offered to help with logistics, accommodation, transport, and paperwork. "You won't owe me anything," he said. "Just bring your camera." That night, Rachel drafted an email to him with her portfolio. She hesitated before pressing send, her finger hovering above the key, aware of how much she wanted him to be real. He replied within an hour, praising her work in a way that felt both exact and tender. "You see light like a painter," he wrote. "I'll make sure people here see you too." Their conversations deepened. He began sharing fragments of his private life, that his parents had died young, that he was raised by an uncle who still clung to Ottoman customs. He said he had never been understood by Western women, that they saw him as exotic rather than human. Rachel listened, comforted, reassured. In return, she confessed her fear of insignificance, of living quietly and disappearing unnoticed. Emir told her that wouldn't happen anymore. Some people are meant to be seen by the world, he said. You're one of them. In March, he began calling her Ruhum, my soul. The first time he said it, she laughed awkwardly, but he explained it meant more than love. It meant belonging. He told her that the world had grown too transactional, that he wanted something sacred. She told her mother about him one evening over dinner, describing him as old-fashioned in a good way. Karen smiled politely, but changed the subject. By April, Emir was video calling her every day. He never showed much of his surroundings, usually just a dark background or a balcony with lights in the distance. Once she asked for a tour of his house, and he laughed, saying, "One day when you're here." When she asked about his supposed foundation, he sent a website link. It looked legitimate: photos of architecture, a mission statement, contact information. Only later would investigators discover the site was less than 6 months old. The invitation came casually. "You should come this summer. See the world I've been telling you about." He said he'd arrange her visa, cover her first week's stay, and introduce her to his family's curator. She thought about it for days before agreeing. He told her he would meet her at the airport himself. "You'll recognize me before I see you," he said. "I'll be holding your favorite color." She asked what that was. "Blue," he answered immediately. "The color of your passport." At the time, Rachel thought it was poetic. Later, investigators would replay that line again and again, noting how precise it was, how from the very beginning, Emir had known exactly which parts of her to see and which to keep in the dark. The trust came quietly, as it often does, now not in declarations, but in the rhythm of ordinary messages. By May, their conversations had become ritual. Rachel woke to a "Good morning, Ruhum," and went to sleep with a dream of the Bosphorus. Emir's presence threaded through her days like a private channel of calm. He never pushed. He asked about her mother, her work, what frightened her as a child. He told her stories of his own loneliness, growing up in a house too large, walking empty corridors lined with portraits of men he never met. "I was raised around people who had power but no affection," he said once. "You're teaching me to be human again," Rachel believed him. The way he spoke carried a vulnerability that felt rare. He said he trusted her more than anyone, that her honesty made him feel safe. In hindsight, it was the perfect inversion. He made her feel trusted so she would trust him completely. Small gifts began to arrive by mail. A silk scarf printed with tulip motifs, a silver bracelet with her initials, a small book of Rumi's poetry with handwritten notes in the margins. Each arrived with a message: "So you have a piece of my world until you join it." He never mentioned the cost, only the sentiment. She photographed the gifts for her journal, captioning one picture: "He understands me in ways that don't need explaining." Friends noticed her growing detachment from everything else. She missed casual gatherings, stopped posting on social media, and began using WhatsApp exclusively for him. When Clara tried to joke about mystery princes, Rachel smiled faintly and said, "He's not like that. He doesn't even care about money." But Emir had started asking small favors, not financial, but emotional. He wanted her to stop talking to an old male friend who commented often on her photos. "It's disrespectful," he said softly but firmly. "Not to me, but to what we're building." She complied without protest, telling herself it was cultural. He began to shape her world through language. He introduced phrases that became their code: Ruhum for intimacy, Saber, patience, for when she questioned delays. He said patience was sacred, that Westerners rushed everything, even love. She started repeating his phrases unconsciously, translating her thoughts into his rhythm. It felt like connection. It was, in truth, conditioning. One evening, during a video call, he introduced her to an older man he called Uncle Kemal. The man spoke little English, but Emir translated, saying his uncle was impressed by her art and wanted to host her at the family estate when she arrived. The video was grainy, the background dimly lit, but the impression of formality was convincing. After the call, Emir sent her a message: "He already considers you family." That night, Rachel cried quietly. Not out of fear, but relief. The feeling of finally being chosen, of belonging to something larger than herself. It had been years since anyone had made her feel that visible. As her departure approached, Emir became more practical. He instructed her to delete their early message threads, claiming Turkish authorities could misinterpret them during her visa process. He sent her a digital itinerary and a list of essential contacts to present at customs, all perfectly formatted, with the name of a real cultural foundation that investigators later confirmed had been cloned from a legitimate institution. When she mentioned booking a hotel for the first few nights, he discouraged it. "Hotels are for tourists," he said. "You'll be with me, safer that way." She hesitated. He sensed it. His tone shifted, not angry, just wounded. "You still think I'm like the men who use women?" he asked. She rushed to reassure him. By morning, she had cancelled her reservation. Her mother's concern grew. Karen asked to meet Emir over video before Rachel left. He agreed, but postponed twice, citing security meetings for his restoration projects. When they finally spoke, it lasted less than 5 minutes. He was polite, deferential, and impeccably calm. "Your daughter is very special," he said. "I promise she will be treated with respect here." His English was formal, almost rehearsed. When the call ended, Karen admitted he seemed too perfect. Rachel brushed it off. "He's just traditional," she said. In their final week of long distance, Emir began to plan her arrival with meticulous care. He told her which terminal to exit, which taxi brand to avoid, even what color dress to wear so he could find her easily. "Blue," he reminded her again. "The color that suits you best." On her last night in Tucson, she wrote in her private journal, "Maybe love doesn't have to be loud to be real. Maybe it just asks for trust." When investigators found that journal later, that sentence was underlined twice. Rachel's flight from Phoenix to Istanbul took nearly 16 hours, with a layover in Frankfurt that she barely remembered. She was nervous but exhilarated. Her camera bag pressed against her chest as if it held not just her gear, but the proof that she was doing something extraordinary. At the airport gate, she'd taken a selfie and sent it to Clara with a message that read, "Next stop, the rest of my life." Clara replied with a heart emoji and a half-joking warning, "Don't get married before you come back." Rachel laughed. The descent into Istanbul came at dawn. Through the oval window, she saw the city emerging in shades of blue and copper, the sea glinting beneath a thin layer of mist. The airport was loud and alive, a whirl of languages and faces, none of them familiar. When she cleared customs, her phone buzzed with a message. "I'm waiting near the exit by the sign that says domestic transfers." "I'll be holding something blue." He was. Emir stood at the edge of the crowd, tall, sharply dressed, a navy scarf looped around his neck. His smile was composed but genuine. When he saw her, he raised a small tulip-shaped charm, blue enamel on silver wire. For a moment, Rachel froze, overwhelmed by the strange symmetry between fantasy and reality. Then she walked toward him, the air between them charged with something unspoken. Their first conversation in person was almost silent. He took her luggage, brushed her shoulder lightly, and led her through the chaos of arriving passengers. His scent, something like cedar and cologne, lingered in her memory later, one of the few details that investigators could corroborate from witness accounts. The driver waiting outside didn't speak English. Emir opened the car door for her and said softly, "Welcome home." They drove across the Bosphorus Bridge as morning light spread over the water. Rachel filmed the skyline from the window, whispering, "It's so beautiful," while Emir smiled beside her, answering, "Wait until you see where you'll be staying." The apartment was in Beyoğlu, a modern flat with clean lines overlooking a courtyard filled with stray cats. He told her it belonged to a friend who often lent it to visiting artists. The key was already in his hand. The first 2 days passed in a blur of color and sound. Emir took her to breakfast by the water, to a spice market, to a small gallery where he said his cousin worked. The cousin never appeared, but the staff greeted Emir warmly. He seemed to know everyone. Rachel photographed everything. The calligraphy on shop signs, the pale stones under her feet, the way the air shimmered at noon. In the evenings, they ate together in silence. He never let her pay. "You're my guest," he reminded her. "Soon you'll be my collaborator." Still, there were small details that unsettled her, though she couldn't yet name them. His phone was always off during meals. He avoided letting her meet anyone twice. When she suggested visiting a tourist site alone, he frowned. "You don't know the city yet," he said. "Some people see foreigners as opportunity." The irony would later strike her friends like a cruel joke. On the fourth day, he told her they would travel to Bursa to meet his uncle and see the family property. He said there would be no phone service there, that the estate was deep in the countryside. "It will give you peace," he promised. "Time to work on your art." She hesitated. Something in his tone felt absolute. But he softened it with a smile. "You came to see my world, didn't you?" She packed lightly, camera, sketchbook, one dress. Before leaving, she texted Clara, "Heading out of the city for a few days. Don't panic if I don't reply." Clara responded with a thumbs up and a joke about royal treatment. That message would later become evidence. Time-stamped less than 24 hours before Rachel's phone went dark. They drove for hours, leaving the crowded highways for narrow, winding roads lined with olive trees. Emir talked less than usual. Rachel tried to take photos through the car window, but the light was too harsh. When she asked how far the property was, he said, "Not far, just beyond the hills." She dozed off near dusk. When she woke, the sun had set. The house appeared at the end of a dirt lane, surrounded by stone walls and overgrown vines. It wasn't grand, not like the mansions he described. More like an old farmhouse, the kind that might have once been part of something larger. A single light burned in an upstairs window. The driver unloaded her bag and drove off without a word. Inside, the air smelled of dust and citrus polish. Emir showed her a small room with a balcony. "You can rest here," he said. "Tomorrow we'll visit the village." She asked if his uncle was home. "He's traveling," Emir said quickly. "He'll be back soon." That night, Rachel wrote a short entry in her journal. "He's different here, quieter. Maybe he's just tired." The last line read, "It feels strange not hearing the city anymore." The next morning she woke to silence. No traffic, no voices, just wind moving through the olive trees. Her phone showed no signal. Emir's room door was closed. She stepped onto the balcony and saw nothing but fields stretching into pale horizon. It should have felt peaceful. Instead, it felt like the world had narrowed to the size of that house. The days that followed blurred together, marked not by hours, but by the changing light through the shuttered windows. At first it seemed like a quiet retreat. Emir told her that the countryside was meant to cleanse the noise of modern life. He said artists needed silence. Rachel believed him or wanted to. She spent the first day photographing cracks in the stone walls, dust motes drifting in the late afternoon sun. But when she asked about returning to the city, he brushed it aside. "Soon," he said. "Let's not rush what's meant to unfold." The isolation grew incrementally. Her phone lost service entirely by the second day. When she asked for Wi-Fi, Emir told her the router was broken, that rural infrastructure here was unreliable. He smiled when he said it, and his tone made refusal sound like care. "Don't worry," he told her. "You're safe here. You're with me." By the third day, he had taken her passport for safekeeping. He said foreign visitors could be fined for not registering properly, and he would handle the paperwork. The gesture was gentle but final. When she protested, he reminded her that this was not America. Things were different here. He never raised his voice, never threatened. Control didn't need force when it had patience. Meals were prepared by a housekeeper who never spoke to her directly. Emir translated, explaining she was shy and old-fashioned. Rachel began to notice that certain doors were always locked. A back door leading to the garden, a narrow staircase descending into darkness. The first time she tried to open one, the housekeeper appeared silently behind her, shaking her head. Emir's presence became both constant and distant. He would leave for hours, claiming to meet local officials, and return smelling of smoke and rain. When she asked what he did during those absences, he changed the subject. He grew affectionate at odd times, a touch on the shoulder, a compliment whispered like a secret, then vanished again. He controlled the rhythm of her world, when to eat, when to walk, when to rest. At night, she began to hear things, the faint hum of a generator, footsteps on the gravel, voices outside her window that faded when she approached. Once she saw headlights sweep across the courtyard at midnight, followed by the sound of a car door and low laughter. When she mentioned it the next morning, Emir said she'd been dreaming. The calm politeness between them slowly eroded. He no longer called her Ruham. He called her Rachel, with clipped precision, as though the word itself was a test. When she asked about the promised art exhibition, he grew irritated. "You think the world revolves around your pictures," he said. It was the first time he raised his voice. The silence that followed was worse than the anger. She tried to rationalize it, maybe cultural stress, maybe business troubles. But the small inconsistencies gathered like dust in corners. His stories shifted. He said his uncle was dead, then alive but abroad. He said he'd studied in London, then Berlin. One night, while he was gone, she searched the bookshelf in his study and found no English titles, no academic papers, nothing that matched the life he'd described. When she looked out from the balcony the next morning, she saw two men unloading boxes from a truck near the far wall of the property. One looked up, saw her, and quickly turned away. That afternoon, Emir told her not to go outside anymore. "There are workers," he said. "They don't need distraction." His tone was final. By the end of the week, Rachel began to feel her edges blur, a strange detachment from herself. She marked time by the call to prayer from a distant village, by the smell of bread baking, by the quiet clicking of Emir's phone when he locked himself in the study. She began hiding small things. Her camera's memory card beneath the floorboard, a note written in her journal describing the location, just in case. One evening she asked when they would go back to Istanbul. Emir's expression didn't change. "You're not ready," he said. "You still see with foreign eyes." She tried to laugh, but his gaze didn't soften. "You should be grateful," he added. "Most women in your country never find peace." That night she packed a small bag, her journal, a lens, her phone, still without signal. She waited until she heard him snoring in the next room. The floor creaked with every step. She reached the front door and turned the handle. It didn't move. The lock had been replaced. She stood there for a long time, hand trembling on the metal, before slipping back into bed without a sound. When morning came, Emir greeted her as if nothing had happened. He served coffee, spoke about taking her to the nearby village soon. "You'll like it," he said. "They make the best bread." His calmness terrified her more than anger ever could. That was when she realized the truth she'd been avoiding. She wasn't his guest anymore. She was his possession, and no one in the world knew where she was. The next few days became a quiet performance of normalcy. Rachel smiled when he spoke, thanked him for meals, pretended to sleep when he paced the hallway at night. Inside, she was mapping every sound, every door hinge, every route out. The house had begun to feel smaller, almost airless. The curtains were drawn most of the time. She could no longer tell what day it was. Her camera, once an extension of herself, sat unused on the dresser like a relic from another life. She began keeping track of time by the light. Morning was pale yellow through the shutters. Noon was a dense white heat, and evening arrived with a hum of insects that filled the silence he left when he disappeared for hours. Sometimes she'd hear the car engine, the crunch of gravel fading, and she would move quickly, testing the windows, the latches, the corners of the house, all of them sealed tight. One window had been nailed shut from the outside. When Emir returned one afternoon, she asked cautiously if she could walk outside just to take photographs of the olive trees. "Tomorrow," he said. "It's not safe today." He didn't explain why. That night she overheard him speaking on the phone in Turkish, his tone sharp, impatient. She didn't understand the words, but she recognized her own name. The next morning, she found the housekeeper burning papers in the courtyard, receipts, wrappers, fragments of what looked like old photos. When Rachel approached, the woman's eyes filled with warning. She muttered something under her breath and quickly turned away. It was the first time Rachel saw fear in someone else's face. By then, sleep had become impossible. She began writing notes in her journal, small coded lines that looked like poetry, but recorded her reality. 2 men. Truck. Door locked. He leaves at noon. It gave her a fragile sense of control. She hid the notebook under the mattress. Later, when investigators found it, those entries would be used to reconstruct her final week. One afternoon, a storm rolled in from the sea. The sky darkened and the generator hummed to life. Emir sat by the window, staring into the rain. "You don't understand how lucky you are," he said suddenly. "Most women here would do anything to live like you do." His tone wasn't cruel, just matter of fact. "I protect you from everything, even yourself," Rachel didn't respond. She'd learned that silence kept her safer, but inside, something had begun to shift, not panic, but a slow, steady resolve. She remembered what her father had told her when teaching her to use a camera. Light always finds a crack. That night, when Emir went to his study, she searched his room. In a drawer beneath his clothes, she found a collection of passports, different names, different countries. She recognized one face, a woman from France, smiling. Her document expired 2 years earlier. Another bore a name she couldn't pronounce. Her own passport wasn't there. The drawer closed with a soft click that sounded too loud in the stillness. Later, she heard him moving through the hallway. He stopped outside her door. She froze. A moment passed, then another. Finally, his footsteps receded. She exhaled, realizing she'd been holding her breath for what felt like hours. The next day, she pretended to be ill. She said she needed medicine from a pharmacy in town. Emir shook his head. "No need," he said. "Rest. I'll take care of everything." He left that afternoon, locking the outer door behind him. Rachel waited until the sound of the car disappeared. Then she moved. She went first to the balcony. The drop below was too steep. Next she tried the kitchen window, one hinge loose, rusted but not sealed. She pushed it open inch by inch until she could feel the dry wind on her face. Her heartbeat was steady now. She grabbed her camera, her phone, and the small bag she'd packed before. She slipped through the window, scraping her arm on the sill, and landed hard on the ground. The world outside smelled of dust and sage. She started walking barefoot, following the dirt road that curved away from the house. The horizon glowed faintly orange. She didn't know where she was going, only that she had to move before dark. Somewhere behind her a door slammed. She broke into a run. Her breath came fast, uneven, her feet cutting on gravel. She could hear her pulse in her ears, the echo of it merging with distant thunder. Then, the sound of an engine. A single flash of headlights swept the field. She stumbled into a ditch, pressing herself into the earth, holding her breath as the car passed slowly. It stopped once, paused, then rolled on. Rachel waited until the night swallowed the road again. Then she stood, shaking, and began walking toward the faint glow of what she hoped was a village. She didn't know that this would be the last time anyone would see her alive. It was near midnight when a farmer in a neighboring village claimed he heard a woman shouting in English from somewhere beyond the fields. The sound was faint, carried by the wind, and when he went to check, the road was empty. The next morning, he mentioned it to a local policeman. But with no missing person reports in the area, it was dismissed as imagination. Tourists get lost, they find their way back. By then, the rain had already erased any footprints she might have left. In Istanbul, Rachel's mother grew uneasy when 2 days passed with no reply to her messages. At first, she told herself it was just the rural signal, like Rachel had said. But on the 3rd day, her texts began to turn into prayers, typed through shaking hands. "Just let me know you're okay." One word, the blue ticks never appeared. She called the U.S. Embassy, then the local police. By the time a report was filed, Rachel had been missing for 5 days. Authorities traced her arrival easily, her flight records, her hotel booking, the last ATM withdrawal in Beyoğlu. But after that, the trail dissolved. The apartment she had stayed in was registered under a shell company. The phone number she'd used to message Emir was prepaid and deactivated. Immigration records showed no departure. It was as if she had evaporated between the city and the countryside. Investigators began reconstructing her digital life. In the forum where she'd met Emir, his profile was gone. The IP address led to a series of VPN routes: Cyprus, Dubai, finally Russia. They found fragments of his emails, each one crafted with precision, blending truth and invention seamlessly. Whoever he was, one investigator later said, he'd done this before. Back in the village, police began quietly asking questions. Locals remembered seeing a dark sedan passing through often, always with tinted windows. A shopkeeper recalled a tall foreign woman buying water and bread. She looked tired, he said, like she hadn't slept. That was around the time of the storm. 2 officers visited the farmhouse that Emir had described as his family estate. They found it empty. Dust covered the floors. The furniture was stripped bare, except for a mattress in one of the rooms. A broken camera lens lay on the ground. The brand and serial number later matched to Rachel's equipment. There was no sign of Emir or of anyone else. The car was found a week later, abandoned near a service road, its license plates registered under another name. Traces of mud on the tires matched soil from the property. Inside the glove compartment was a folded piece of paper, directions to the ferry dock in Istanbul. Forensic teams combed through it, hoping for prints, but the paper had been handled too many times. When they searched the nearby fields, they found fragments of a burnt handbag, a pair of sunglasses and a single earring. A few meters away, a shallow depression in the earth suggested something had been buried and moved. But no remains were ever found. Interpol issued an alert, and Turkish media briefly covered the case. Headlines spoke of the vanishing of the American photographer. Online forums speculated wildly: a trafficking ring, an organ trade, a cult. But official updates soon faded. The embassy offered limited statements, citing ongoing cooperation. Rachel's name slipped into the long list of foreigners who disappear abroad. Stories that begin as mysteries and end as silence. Privately, investigators continued to pursue the digital angle. Through an encrypted messaging app, they uncovered aliases linked to Emir, one name recurring across multiple romance and investment scams targeting women in Europe and the Middle East. In each case, the man had promised love, opportunity, or purpose. The pattern was chillingly consistent: isolation, emotional dependence, and eventual disappearance. When agents compared passport photos of several missing women from past years, 2 bore an uncanny resemblance to the ones found in that drawer at the farmhouse. But without conclusive DNA, no case could be formally tied to Rachel's. "He's a ghost," said one of the detectives. "He exists only in other people's belief." Weeks later, a fisherman discovered an object tangled in seaweed near the ferry docks, a water-damaged passport. The cover bent, the photograph still visible under the film of salt. It was Rachel's. That, and her camera memory card found months later in a resale market in Izmir, were the only pieces ever recovered. The final images on the card were mundane: photos of market stalls, a cracked teacup, her own reflection in a window. The last photo was darker, a blurred frame taken at dusk, showing what appeared to be a field and a faint silhouette in the distance. Experts couldn't tell if she had taken it intentionally or by accident. The timestamp was June 10th, 10:42 p.m. It was the same night the farmer said he heard a voice carried through the storm, calling out for help in a language he didn't understand. The investigation dragged on through the humid summer of 2021. For a while, Rachel's story flickered across news outlets, another mystery made tragic by distance. Reporters replayed her last social media posts, pieced together clips from her travel vlogs, analyzed her texts to friends as if meaning could be excavated from grammar. For the public, it was a story about danger abroad. For her family, it was simply the sound of a door that never opened again. The Turkish police maintained a steady but opaque response. They interviewed locals, cross-checked vehicle records, and raided 2 unlicensed restoration workshops in the Bursa region that matched Emir's descriptions. One was empty except for a printing press and stacks of fake university certificates. The other contained computer equipment, drives wiped clean, a few with remnants of contact lists in multiple languages. The names belonged to women from 6 countries, most of them listed as artists, students, or freelancers. It was enough to suggest a pattern, but not enough to prove one. Interpol specialists examined the data trails linked to Emir's alias. The accounts connected to his supposed foundation had received transfers from several victims, often labeled as travel expenses or artist stipends. The money was routed through offshore intermediaries and withdrawn in cash within days. When investigators tracked one withdrawal in Istanbul, security footage showed a man of similar build and height as Emir, wearing a mask, carrying a briefcase, walking calmly into the crowd. Meanwhile, back in Arizona, Karen Monroe became the voice of her daughter's absence. She held a press conference outside her home, her voice trembling only once when she said, "If anyone hears this, she is not just a photograph. She is my child." Donations poured into a search fund. Volunteers printed posters in Turkish, Arabic, and English. But in a country with thousands of missing persons cases, the story was soon overtaken by other news. Private investigators hired by the family followed a new lead in late July. A witness claimed to have seen a foreign woman matching Rachel's description in a coastal town near Izmir, accompanied by 2 men. When authorities checked the area, they found no record of her at any hotel or port. Still, the lead reopened old theories, that Rachel had been trafficked rather than killed, that her disappearance was part of a larger network targeting travelers through romance scams. NGOs confirmed the pattern existed, though most victims were rescued within weeks, not lost entirely. Through diplomatic channels, a joint US-Turkish task force quietly assembled a broader picture. Between 2018 and 2021, at least 13 women from North America and Western Europe had vanished after contact with men claiming to represent cultural programs in Turkey, Lebanon, and northern Cyprus. All had been approached online. Only 4 were ever located. The others, like Rachel, left traces too thin to follow. A Turkish cybercrime analyst later described Emir's persona as a collective identity. Several men, he believed, used the same photographs and scripts, alternating messages to maintain continuity. The person who met Rachel at the airport might not have been the same one who had written to her for months. "It's a system," the analyst said. "A business that sells illusion until the illusion becomes possession." In October, the US Embassy released a final statement acknowledging ongoing efforts, but no progress. The Monroe family returned to Arizona with Rachel's belongings, her notebook, the restored photos from her camera card, the silver bracelet she had worn in nearly every picture. The passport, once her proof of identity, now sat sealed in evidence. Forensic linguists later reviewed her chats with Emir. They found subtle manipulations, mirrored language, delayed replies timed to coincide with her emotional lows, cultural flattery alternating with subtle correction. It was, one expert said, a textbook grooming process structured to create dependency. When asked what he thought motivated the perpetrators, he replied, "Power, always power, the kind that hides behind tenderness." In the following months, Karen received anonymous emails claiming Rachel was alive, being held somewhere in the Balkans. Each message demanded money for proof of life. None provided any. Authorities traced them to phishing networks in multiple countries. Still, Karen read every word because not knowing had become its own kind of faith. When winter came, the case faded from headlines. But for the few investigators who stayed on it, the silence was instructive. The farmhouse had been cleared within 48 hours of the first police visit. The vehicle registration trail ended in an abandoned warehouse near the port. Surveillance footage from the area had been deleted days before detectives requested it. Someone had planned the erasure with precision, One officer later admitted off-record, "We were always 3 days too late." Whoever he was, he knew how long compassion takes to mobilize. The official file closed in March 2022, labeled Unsolved Disappearance. But the detectives who worked it continued to compare notes informally, tracing every false emir that appeared online. Each time a new profile surfaced, polished, articulate, promising cultural exchange, they archived it under the same internal tag, Monroe Patton. Behind each message, another woman somewhere was being told she was special, that her art or kindness was a mirror of someone else's soul. And each time, investigators wondered if, in some unrecorded corner of the world, Rachel's story was still repeating itself, line for line, message for message. In the quiet blue light of another screen, the years that followed did not bring closure, only quieter forms of endurance. Karen Monroe turned her daughter's bedroom into a kind of archive, shelves lined with prints from Rachel's old negatives, stacks of her notebooks, the half-finished photo project she'd titled Light That Stays. Each morning, she opened the blinds, letting sun pour over the bed as though Rachel might return and sit where she used to. The house no longer felt like home, just a witness. In Istanbul, the police investigation had long since gone cold. The farmhouse had been sold to another family. The car, after months in an impound lot, was released and later scrapped. The detective who had first handled the case retired, but he kept one photo pinned to his wall, a black and white shot of the Bosphorus at dusk, one of Rachel's recovered images. "It reminds me that she was real," he told a journalist. That what happened wasn't just a story. For journalists and online sleuths, Rachel's case became both legend and cautionary tale. True crime podcasts dissected her messages line by line, arguing over when fantasy had become danger. Some accused her of recklessness. Others saw her as the inevitable casualty of a digital world where sincerity could be manufactured. A Turkish investigative magazine ran a feature titled "The Woman Who Vanished into a Story." It proposed that Emir had been part of a coordinated trafficking network operating across 3 countries. But without bodies, witnesses, or arrests, the theory dissolved into speculation. Karen stopped reading the articles. What haunted her weren't the theories, but the details no one else could care about. The sound of Rachel's laugh echoing in an empty kitchen. The smell of darkroom chemicals she used to bring home on her clothes. When strangers sent condolences online, she replied to none. "I don't want sympathy," she told a friend once. "I want a door to knock on." A year after the case closed, a journalist from an Istanbul paper revisited the story. He retraced Rachel's route from the airport to Beyoğlu, walked the alleys she'd photographed, and took the same ferry she would have taken if she'd ever reached the docks again. He ended his piece with a line that stayed with readers. "Sometimes the city keeps its secrets not in darkness, but in plain light, in faces that pass you, knowing you will never look twice." Rachel's disappearance became a point of reference in NGO training seminars about online grooming and travel fraud. Her correspondence with Emir, edited for privacy, was used as a case study for manipulation. The pattern was depressingly familiar. Isolation disguised as intimacy, flattery disguised as mentorship, safety disguised as protection. Her story was no longer only hers. It had become a map of how belief can be turned against itself. In Arizona, Karen began speaking at small community colleges about digital awareness. She never used the word trafficking. It felt too distant, too bureaucratic, but she spoke of love, of how easily connection can become confinement. "It starts with a compliment," she'd say softly, "and ends with silence." Her talks drew small crowds. Most stayed after just to hug her. She didn't always let them. Every few months, someone claimed to have seen Rachel, a woman on a train in Croatia, a street musician in Athens, a volunteer worker in southern Turkey. Each time, investigators checked. Each time, it wasn't her. Hope kept arriving in short bursts and fading just as quickly. Like bad signal years later, in 2024, a recovered phone from a raid on a trafficking network in coastal Lebanon contained fragments of English text messages. phrases Rachel once used, half-sentences she had written to Emir. Forensics could never confirm whether they were hers or copied from her old correspondence. Karen was notified but chose not to ask for more details. "If she's gone," she said quietly, "then someone out there still carries her words." Her story circulates now in documentaries, podcasts, and digital archives, told as both warning and elegy. The narrator's voice always softens at the end, describing the last known photo on her camera card, a blurred horizon, the faint line of a hill, a figure almost lost in shadow. Experts debate what the image shows, but most agree it feels like movement, a single step toward escape. Names and some details have been changed for privacy. Some scenes dramatized. What remains certain is that Rachel Monroe's story didn't end with her disappearance. It endures as a reminder that trust, once misplaced, becomes its own form of disappearance, the kind that erases people not all at once, but slowly through affection, through longing, through the quiet hope that love might make the world less dangerous. And yet, for those who listen closely, her photographs still speak. Small squares of light insisting that somewhere, even in darkness, someone was still trying